I've learned that the worst betrayals rarely announce themselves. They arrive dressed as compliments. I was the one who trained her. I was the one who stayed late walking her through the client files, who taught her how to read a spreadsheet like it was breathing, who covered for her the first time she froze in a pitch meeting and forgot the numbers cold. 6 years I'd given that office. 6 years of showing up before anyone else and leaving after the lights went dim in every window but mine. So when my manager gathered the team on a Tuesday morning, smiling the way people smile when they already know what they're about to do will sting, and announced that she, the intern I had shaped with my own hands, was being promoted into the role I had been quietly promised for over a year, I didn't flinch. I didn't ask why. I already understood the answer before he said it out loud, watching him choose his words like he was diffusing something. Clients respond better to a fresher face, he told me, still smiling. I smiled back. I said congratulations. I meant it, in the strange, hollowed-out way you can mean something and feel nothing at the same time. That night I helped her rehearse her first presentation to the board. I corrected her transitions. I told her which numbers to lead with. What none of them knew, what she certainly didn't know, standing there thanking me for my help, was that 18 hours earlier, our biggest client had called me, not the office line, my personal cell, asking a question only I had the answer to. I hadn't told anyone that yet. I wasn't sure, yet, if I ever would. The office had a particular quiet on Tuesday mornings, the kind that settled in after the coffee machine finished its first cycle and before the phones started ringing in earnest. I used to like that quiet. I used to think of it as mine, in the small way you think of things you've earned by simply being early and reliable for longer than anyone bothers to notice. I don't think of it that way anymore. My name is Elena Cross, and for 6 years I built my life around Whitfield and Marsh, the way other people build their lives around a marriage or a house. I gave it my mornings. I gave it my instincts. I gave it the part of me that used to want other things, a garden, a second language, a life that didn't measure itself in fiscal quarters, until there was so little of that part left that I stopped missing it. I told myself it was worth it, because I was good at it. Not good in the way people are good at things they merely tolerate. Good in the way that made partners quietly request me by name for accounts they didn't trust to anyone else. I built relationships with clients the way you build anything meant to last. Slowly, honestly, with attention paid to the details other people considered beneath them. I remembered a client's daughter's name 3 years after he'd mentioned her once in passing. I remembered which executives took their coffee black, and which ones needed to be flattered before they'd sign anything. It wasn't performance. It was respect, and it had always been returned to me in kind. Which is why, when Priya joined us as an intern the previous spring, I didn't see her as competition. I saw her as someone worth investing in. She was quick, and eager in a way that hadn't yet curdled into ambition for its own sake, and she asked good questions, the kind that told me she was actually listening, not just waiting for her turn to speak. I taught her how to read a balance sheet, the way you'd teach someone to read weather, watching for the small signs that told you a storm was coming before the clouds had even gathered. I taught her which of our clients needed hand-holding, and which ones needed to be left alone. I gave her the parts of my knowledge that had taken me years to earn, because that was what had been given to me once, a long time ago, by a woman who is no longer at the firm, and because I believed, genuinely believed, that generosity like that was supposed to come back around. I did not expect it to come back around wearing my job title. The meeting had been billed as a general team update. Nothing on the calendar suggested otherwise. I'd brought my coffee and my legal pad, the way I did every Tuesday, and I'd taken my usual seat near the window, half listening to Marcus run through quarterly projections, while I mentally reviewed the notes I needed for my 2 o'clock call with Grayson Holdings, our largest account, the one I had personally kept for 4 years, without a single complaint ever reaching leadership's desk. Marcus cleared his throat in the particular way he does when he's about to say something he's rehearsed. I noticed it. I always notice these things. It's part of what makes me good at what I do. I just didn't think, in that moment, that the rehearsal was about me. I want to announce a promotion, he said, and the room did that thing rooms do when everyone already suspects who the sentence is going to land on, except the person it's actually about. Priya's going to be stepping into the senior client relations role, effective immediately. I remember the sound my coffee cup made when I set it down. I remember it because I was listening for it, because I needed something ordinary to focus on, while the rest of the room reorganized itself around a decision that had apparently already been made, discussed, and finalized without me in any of the rooms where that had happened. Priya's face went through several expressions in quick succession: surprise, something that might have been guilt, and then, unmistakably, pride. She looked at me. I made myself smile before she could see anything else. Marcus was still talking. Something about fresh perspective. Something about how clients had been responding well to newer faces in recent presentations, how the firm needed to modernize its client-facing image. I heard the words. I didn't fully absorb them until later, replaying them alone in my car, the way you replay a wound to check whether it's really as deep as it felt. What I did absorb, immediately, in real time, sitting perfectly still with my hands folded in my lap, was this: someone had decided, in a room I hadn't been invited into, that 6 years of my work could be quietly reassigned to someone I had trained myself, and that I was expected to smile through the announcement of it. So I did. I smiled, and I congratulated her in front of everyone, and I meant every syllable of a sentence I did not mean at all. And I might have gone on meaning it, might have let it settle into the kind of quiet resentment that curdles slowly and never surfaces, if my phone hadn't buzzed in my blazer pocket 40 minutes later, with a number I recognized instantly, a number that belonged to someone who had no idea what had just happened in that meeting, and who was about to ask me a question that would change everything. I didn't answer it in the meeting. I let it ring through, watching the screen dim back to black on the table beside my legal pad, and I finished listening to Marcus explain, in the gentle tone people use when they know they're doing something indefensible, how Priya would be shadowing me for the transition period. Shadowing. As if 6 years could be summarized into a 2-week handoff, like passing along a set of keys. I waited until I was back at my desk, door half closed, before I called the number back. Elena. Richard Grayson's voice had the particular warmth it always carried when he was about to ask me for something he considered too delicate for anyone else at the firm. Richard was 71 years old and had built Grayson Holdings from a single warehouse into a logistics empire spanning 4 states, and in 4 years of managing his account, I had never once heard him raise his voice. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. Not at all, I said, and I meant it, because whatever this was, it was already more honest than the last 40 minutes of my life had been. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me, the way you always are. He paused, and in that pause, I heard something I'd never heard from him before: hesitation. There's a rumor going around that Whitfield is restructuring the account team. My assistant heard it from someone at the country club, if you can believe that. I wanted to hear it from you before I hear it from anyone else. Is it true? I sat very still. Here is what I knew, in that moment, that Richard did not. I had just watched my role get handed to someone else in front of the entire office, less than an hour earlier, with no warning, no consultation, no acknowledgement that the account he was calling about had been built, in large part, on a relationship that existed between him and me specifically. Richard Grayson didn't trust institutions. He trusted people. He had told me that himself, over a lunch 2 years prior, when he'd extended our contract for another 3 years, on nothing but a handshake, and my word that I'd still be the one answering when he called. And here is what I understood, with a clarity that felt almost physical, sitting there with the phone warm against my ear. If I told him the truth right now, in this moment, before the firm had crafted its careful language around the transition, before Priya had been given the chance to prove herself, or fail on her own terms, I would be handing Whitfield and Marsh a crisis they had not yet realized they were standing in the middle of. I could feel the shape of that power, the way you feel the edge of a step in the dark, not fully visible, but unmistakably there. There's been a personnel change, I said carefully. I'd rather explain it to you properly than have you hear pieces of it secondhand. Do you have 20 minutes tomorrow? I have 20 minutes right now, Richard said, and I heard, beneath the words, exactly what he meant. He meant, I am not going anywhere near this account until I understand what's happening to it. He meant, you are the reason I've stayed this long, and I need you to tell me whether that's still true. I looked up, through the glass wall of my office, and saw Priya at her new desk, my old desk, technically, though nobody had said that part out loud, already rearranging the framed photos someone had helpfully moved over for her. She caught my eye and gave a small, uncertain wave, the kind of wave you give someone whose good opinion you're still not entirely sure you've earned. "Richard," I said slowly, "I think this deserves more than a phone call. Can I come by your office tomorrow morning? There are some things about the transition I think you should hear directly from me, before you hear them from anyone else." There was a pause on the line, long enough that I wondered if I'd misjudged something. "Elena," he said finally, and his voice had dropped into something quieter, more deliberate. "Before you come tomorrow, there's something I need to tell you first. Something I probably should have told you a long time ago. It's about why I really called." I asked him what he meant. Richard was quiet for a moment, and I could hear, faintly, the sound of a door closing on his end of the line, the particular click of someone making sure they wouldn't be overheard. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its usual ease. "6 months ago," he said, "your firm's managing partner took me to dinner, David Whitfield himself. Unusual for him to handle a client relationship personally. You know as well as I do, he hasn't done that in years." He paused. "He spent most of the evening asking questions about you." I felt something go still in my chest. What kind of questions? Whether I'd be comfortable working with someone else on the account. Whether my loyalty was really to you specifically, or to the firm. Richard exhaled, and I could picture him exactly, the way he did when he was choosing his words with care, leaning back, one hand pressed flat against his desk. I told him the truth. I told him my loyalty was to whoever actually did right by my company, and that so far, that had only ever been you. I didn't say anything. I was doing the thing I do best, the thing that had made me good at this job for 6 years, listening for what wasn't being said as closely as what was. He didn't like that answer, Richard continued. He asked me, almost in passing, whether I thought a younger presence on the account might modernize things. Whether I thought the firm's image needed refreshing to keep pace with where the industry was headed. I told him I didn't care about the firm's image. I cared about results. He paused again. "I should have called you that night. I've regretted for 6 months that I didn't." The pieces were arranging themselves in my mind with a kind of terrible clarity, a shape I hadn't let myself see until someone else described its outline for me. This hadn't been a sudden decision made in a hallway conversation about fresh faces and modern client relations. This had been in motion for half a year. David Whitfield had gone looking for a reason to move me, tested the waters with my biggest client, gotten an answer he didn't like, and then waited, patiently, quietly, for an opportunity that wouldn't look like what it actually was. Priya hadn't orchestrated anything. I understood that now, watching her through the glass, still fumbling with the unfamiliar height of her new chair. She was exactly what she'd always been, talented, eager, and entirely unaware that she'd been positioned as the acceptable face of a decision that had nothing to do with her, and everything to do with me. "Elena," Richard's voice pulled me back. "I need to know something, and I need you to be honest with me, because I think you already know what I'm about to ask." "Go ahead. Are you still the one handling my account, or not? Because if the answer is no, if they've moved you off this without so much as a conversation with either of us, I want you to know that Grayson Holdings did not sign a 4-year extension with Whitfield and Marsh. We signed it with you, and I am prepared to make that distinction very clear to whoever needs to hear it." I sat with that for a long moment, looking at the closed door of my office, at the reflection of myself in the glass, composed, unreadable, exactly the way I'd trained myself to be for 6 years in rooms full of people who underestimated what that composure was actually costing me. I thought about Marcus's careful phrasing that morning. Fresher face. I thought about the smile David Whitfield would have worn across a dinner table, asking a loyal client to help him build a case against someone who had never given him a single reason to need one. And I thought, for the first time all day, not about how humiliated I felt, but about what it would mean if I simply told Richard Grayson the truth. The whole truth, not the careful, protective version I'd been about to offer him. "Richard," I said, "I don't think this is a conversation we should be having over the phone at all. I think you need to see something first. There's a file I've been keeping for years. Client notes, correspondence, records of exactly who has done what on this account since the day I took it over. I think it's time you saw all of it." There was a long silence on the line. Then bring it tomorrow, he said quietly. And Elena, bring anything else you have. I have a feeling this isn't only about my account. I didn't sleep much that night. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, and the file I'd mentioned to Richard pulled up in front of me. 6 years of documentation I'd kept not out of paranoia, but out of habit, the same habit that made me remember which executives took their coffee black. I had never planned to use it as a weapon. I had simply never been the kind of person who trusted a verbal agreement to survive on its own, not after watching, early in my career, a colleague get quietly erased from a project she'd built because she had nothing on paper to prove her hand in it. The file was thorough in a way that surprised even me, looking at it again with fresh eyes. Every call log with Grayson Holdings, going back to the week I'd taken over the account. Every email where Richard had specifically requested me by name for a negotiation. The renewal contract itself, with a clause, one I'd insisted on adding, almost as an afterthought, 3 years earlier, that named me as the primary relationship manager for the duration of the agreement, with any change requiring written client consent. I remembered adding that clause. I remembered Marcus telling me it was unnecessary, that clients didn't care about boilerplate like that I was overthinking a simple renewal. I hadn't argued with him. I'd just quietly kept it in the final draft, the way I quietly kept most things that mattered to me, and Richard had signed it without comment, the way he signed everything, trusting that whatever I'd put in front of him was in both our interests. Nobody at Whitfield and Marsh had reread that contract in 3 years. I would have bet on it. I arrived at Grayson Holdings the next morning at 9, the file in a leather folder under my arm, and found Richard waiting for me not in his office, but in the small conference room adjoining it, the one he reserved for conversations he didn't want his assistant overhearing. He looked older than he had the last time I'd seen him in person, though it had only been 3 weeks. Or maybe I was only now allowing myself to notice things I'd been too busy to see. "Show me," he said, without preamble, and I did. I walked him through the contract clause first, watching his face as he read it, as he recognized his own signature at the bottom of a page he clearly hadn't looked at closely since the day he'd signed it. Then the call logs, then the emails. I laid it all out the way I'd laid out client presentations for 6 years, methodically, without embellishment, letting the facts carry whatever weight they needed to carry on their own. "So they can't actually move you off this account," Richard said slowly, without asking me first. "And they didn't ask." "They didn't ask," I confirmed. He sat back, and for a long moment he simply looked at me, and I had the strange sensation of being truly seen for the first time in longer than I could remember. Not as an efficient, reliable extension of a firm, but as a person who had been quietly, methodically wronged, and who had known it long before anyone else in the room had bothered to notice. "I want to be very clear about something," he said. "I'm not interested in punishing the young woman they promoted. From what you've told me, she didn't ask for any of this, and it sounds like you're the reason she has any skills at all. This isn't about her." He tapped the folder once. "But I am interested in having a conversation with David Whitfield. Today, if possible. And I want you in that room." My phone buzzed against the table between us before I could answer. I glanced down out of habit and felt something in my chest tighten. It was a message from Priya, not from the office line, not routed through any official channel. Her personal number, the one she'd only ever used to ask me small, harmless questions about formatting a slide or phrasing an email. "Elena, I need to talk to you before you go into any meetings today. Please. There's something about yesterday I don't think you know, and I don't think I can keep pretending I don't know it either." Richard was watching my face. "Something wrong?" I looked up from the screen, my mind already running through every conversation I'd had with Priya over the past year, searching for whatever piece I might have missed. "I'm not sure yet," I said, "but I think we might need to hear from one more person before we decide how this conversation with Whitfield should go." I asked Richard for 10 minutes and stepped into the hallway to call her. Priya answered on the first ring, and I could tell from the tightness in her voice that she'd been sitting with her phone in her hand, waiting. "I didn't know how to say this in a message," she said. "Can I come to you? I don't want to do this over the phone." Something in her tone told me this wasn't a conversation to postpone. I gave her Richard's address, and 20 minutes later she was standing in the lobby of Grayson Holdings, still in yesterday's blazer, looking like she hadn't slept much either. We found a quiet corner near the windows. She didn't sit down. David called me into his office the day before the announcement, she said, the words coming fast now that she'd started, like she needed to get them out before she lost her nerve. He told me I was being promoted. He made it sound like a reward, like I'd earned it. He never once mentioned you by name. He just said the role was opening up, and that he wanted fresh energy on the account. She twisted the strap of her bag in her hands. I didn't ask what that meant. I should have asked what that meant. I was so happy, Elena. I didn't want to look too closely at where the happiness was coming from. That's not something you need to apologize to me for, I said, and I meant it. She had been handed an opportunity by someone senior to her. She had no way of knowing the floor beneath it had been deliberately removed from under someone else. There's more, she said. Yesterday afternoon, after the meeting, I heard David on the phone in his office. The door wasn't fully closed. He was talking to someone about Grayson Holdings, about how the account needed to see, quote, a face that photographs better for the next decade of the firm. He said your name once. He said it like... She stopped herself, then continued more quietly. Like you were a line item he was finally getting to cross off. I felt the words land somewhere very still inside me. Not surprise, exactly. Confirmation of something I'd already begun to understand, spoken now by someone with nothing to gain from telling me. I didn't train under you because I wanted your job, Priya said. I trained under you because you were the only person in that building who actually taught me anything instead of just handing me work and taking credit for it. I'm not going to stand in that new office pretending I don't know how I got there. When I brought her into the conference room, Richard listened to her account the way he listened to everything, carefully, without interrupting, filing away every detail. When she finished, he thanked her, genuinely, and told her she was welcome to leave before the next call, that none of what was about to happen needed to touch her. She looked at me instead of him. I'd rather stay, she said, if that's all right with you. David Whitfield joined the call 40 minutes later, expecting, I imagine, a routine transition conversation with a valued client. What he got instead was Richard Grayson reading aloud, calmly, and without raising his voice, the exact language of a contract clause David's own firm had drafted and forgotten, followed by a simple question, whether Whitfield and Marsh intended to honor the agreement it had signed, or whether Grayson Holdings needed to begin evaluating other firms that would. I watched David's composure fracture in real time, the practiced warmth in his voice giving way to something thinner and more desperate, as he realized there was no version of this conversation where the contract wasn't going to be read back to him by the client himself. I didn't need to raise my voice either. I simply confirmed, when Richard asked, that I remained willing to continue managing the account, under my own name, in my own role, with the written consent the contract required. By the end of the week, that clause had done more for me than any confrontation ever could have. My title was restored, formally, in writing. Priya, to her credit, asked to be moved onto a different account entirely, one she could build without anyone's shadow attached to it, and I made sure she got a mentor who'd treat her the way I once had, honestly. I never raised my voice through any of it. I never needed to. I had simply, quietly, made sure that when the truth finally came looking for a place to land, it would find nothing but solid ground beneath my feet. If this story moved you, stay a while longer. There are more women like Elena whose quiet strength deserves to be heard. Subscribe to the channel, and join us for the next story of patience, dignity, and the justice that always finds its way home.